Okay, this is going to be a really straightforward and fast lesson where I teach you a little bit more about how to work with rows and columns. Okay, so we already know that rows are the numbers that go down the left-hand side of the page, and the columns are the letters that go across the top of the page. And there's various things you can do with rows and columns that are very important to know at an early stage. So the first thing is you can change the height of rows and you can change the width of columns. So as I covered in the previous lesson, if you move your mouse in between two columns, you will see the cursor type changes, and you can hold down your left mouse and drag over to the right or to the left to change the width of that column. Exactly the same applies to rows. So you can grab a row and you can drag it down, drag it up to make it taller or to make it narrower. You can also delete rows and insert rows. So if I was to type the numbers 1 to 5 in these cells, now let's say I wanted to add a row in between rows 3 and rows 4. What I do is I move my mouse over row number 4. So you can see the mouse cursor has changed to a right hand arrow. And if I left click on that, it highlights the entire row. If I right click on it, I can go down to insert, and it'll insert an entire row in between 3 and 4. Similarly, I've now got that blank row and I want to delete it. I can right click and I go delete. If I wanted to select an entire row and color it in, you would do the same thing. So you move your mouse over to the left hand side, select the entire row, and then let's say I want to change the color to yellow. Another thing to bear in mind is when you're dealing with the height of a row or the width of a column, if you hover your mouse over until you get the change the width or change the height cursor type, you can double click and it will auto fit the height or the width of the row or column to whatever is currently in it. So that can be quite a useful thing. You can also select multiple rows at the same time. So if I select from row 5 up to row 1, I could change that so the background has no fill, for example, and it will apply that to the whole selection of rows that we have selected. Also bear in mind that you can hide and show rows and columns. So if I wanted to hide column B so that it wasn't displayed to the end user, but I did want to keep the information that was in it. So if I wrote hello in this cell here, I don't want you to read that, but I do want it to remain in the file. I could right click on the column the same way that I've been clicking on the rows and go down to hide. And you can see that column B has disappeared across the top. Now if I select from column A across to column C and I right click, I can go to unhide just here, and column B will appear again, but it's got the same values in that we had before. All we've done is hidden it. We hadn't deleted anything in it. So that's quite a useful thing to know, and it's also useful because if you're looking at somebody else's spreadsheet, you may see that there are row numbers missing or column letters missing, and that will indicate that they're hidden, and you can select over them to unhide that information. One final thing here, and then we'll move on to the next lesson, and that is one final thing here before we move on to the next lesson is that you can actually cut and paste rows or columns and move them in their entirety to another place in spreadsheets. So if I was to take row 2 here, which has the number 2 in cell A2, and I wanted to cut everything that's in that entire row right across the page, I could go cut, which is Control and X, or you could just click the cut button just here. And then if I went to between rows 4 and 5, so I right click on row number 5, and I can click on Insert Cut Cells, you can see that rather than sort of removing the data and leaving a blank row in row 2, it's actually moved the entire row down to row number 4 for us. So that's the basics of working with rows and columns. It's really, really simple, but really, really important that you understand those things at this early stage.